I would like to reiterate one ground rule that I would like for us to enforce, and that is please no applause or no disruption. We may have guest visitors from the Carter Baker Commission who will be here this afternoon. We're expecting them here. And one of the concerns that they expressed was that there might be a partisan type reaction. And this is a hearing, and it is a formal event, and so we want to show the decorum of an official hearing into testimony of the problems about the election processes. Thank you. Because some people have some flight schedule changes, there are some changes in the order of speakers during this and the next session. So Richard Wenger and Lynn Landis, who were scheduled for the later panel, will be joining this panel, and I will ask them to testify first. Mr. Wenger, would you, let me ask the panelists, is the testimony you're about to give the truth, the full truth, and only the truth as far as you know it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wenger, would you please introduce yourself and the credentials for your speaking?
I'm going to take about 6 minutes. My name is Richard Wenger, and I'm only going to turn my cell phone on so I have a little clock here because I don't see a clock. I publish ballot access news. I live in San Francisco. I am very distressed at the state of the American ballot access laws. They hurt Democrats and Republicans. They really hurt minor parties and independents. And believe it or not, and this will sound like exaggeration, they are starting to hurt the whole world, because some of the worst countries in the world that have an interest in keeping particular kinds of candidates off their ballots are looking to the United States and saying, they do it, it must be okay. Now, I said even Democrats and Republicans are hurt by our overly restrictive ballot access laws. It's shocking, but election after election, between 1/3 and 3/8 of all state legislative races do not have a contest between a Democrat and a Republican. Only one of the major parties enters the race. In quite a few states, every election, in the typical legislative election, over half of them, there's only one candidate in the ballot. It even extends into congressional races. In 2004, 15% of the races did not have a contest between a Democrat and a Republican. 8% of them had only one person running. 7% had one major party against a minor party or independent. Massachusetts, which has a very liberal progressive tradition, year after year after year, over half the legislative races in the general election only have one candidate in the ballot. And that's the fault of Massachusetts' ballot access laws. If it's bad for Democrats and Republicans, and by the way, in 1994, this took me a year of work. I calculated the number of signatures needed for a Democrat, a Republican party to run somebody for every partisan office in the country, how many signatures they'd need. Even only 19 signatures require major parties to get signatures to place themselves in the ballot. It was 884,000 signatures. Now that's presuming only one person for each office. Obviously, if there's more candidates, there's more signatures. But that's the minimum. The same year, a new party that wanted to run for every partisan office in the country would have needed 5,140,000 ballot signatures. This country is petition crazy. I'm very happy. There's a brand new book out, well, it came out last year, called Establishing the Rules of the Game by 3 political scientists. And one of them, Louis Massicot, is speaking at the Baker-Carter thing tomorrow. They went through and mentioned all the ballot access laws of all the countries in the world that were considered democratic. You had to have a score of Freedom House 1 or 2 to be in this book. There's only 3 countries in the world who require more than 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And that was Poland and Romania and I think Latvia. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but it's all in the book. I don't want to take too much more time because I know there's 5 of us and there's plenty of other subjects, but I am going to waive my 3 minutes.
Okay, very good. This is a new issue that we've looked at to this point, and that is ballot access. So is a race that has basically one candidate really a choice that Americans have? That is the proposition here. Questions?
The limiting factor, then, as I understand it from you, is that they are required to get an exorbitant amount of signatures, or is it also money?
I'm glad you asked that question. You're right. It is money. Some states that do not require any signatures have filing fees that are way too high. Florida is the worst. 6% of the annual salary. That's why, okay, 6% of a congressman's salary, Congress member's salary, is now $9,000. That's why Florida has 25 U.S. House races. In November 2004, 11 of them had either no Democrat or no Republican in the race. 2 of them had a minor party in the race, but that still leaves 9 out of 25 with only 1 person running. It's so common in Florida for only 1 person to be on the ballot. The law says when there's only 1 person running, we take it off the ballot. So that means about 1/3 of the Florida voters, when they voted in November 2004, it didn't say U.S. House of Representatives anywhere in their ballot. It's just missing. But it's mostly signatures.
Follow-up question then. The campaign finance reform laws that they're trying to pass and have passed in a couple of states, do you consider that to be helpful in this regard?
If you're talking about clean elections, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
I have a question, but my mic's not on here. Oh.
You want to use mine?
Yes, in regards to getting ballot access, there are a number of different proposals that a minor party might use to gain ballot access. Could you tell a little bit about which of those you support, such as, for example, they get the same number of signatures as the major party, but they're not required to get it from registered members of their own party, or what do you support in this line?
The idea is a good one of equalizing the number of signatures, because even though the ballot access laws to get on the primary ballot are sometimes too severe, they're not nearly as bad as the laws applicable to minor parties, and so I'd be quite happy if we got that principle established. Congressman Ron Paul and Congressman Tim Penny and Congressman John Conyers, all 3 of them have put in bills to outlaw restricted ballot access laws, but this started in 1985. It's been going on for 20 years. The press never pays any attention to these bills, and they never get a hearing.
I actually have follow-up questions. Sorry, in terms of local officials, how could you propose getting more minor parties to participate on election boards, such as in the position of poll worker, where in some states it is restricted to the major parties?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up too. And New Hampshire has a law that only registered members of the 2 largest parties can be polling place officials. And the Libertarian Party in the past was a fully qualified party, equal in every other sense. It was a qualified party, but the law said only the 2 largest parties could have poll workers. And I thought for sure the courts would have thrown that law out, at least for the Libertarians, who were a fully qualified party. But nope, the First Circuit said, nope, that's just fine. And we've lost on this issue in other places too. In fact, we do not have a single federal court precedent striking these kind of laws down.
Other questions?
Hi. I don't know exactly whether this makes sense, but do you know if there's a good way to measure the level of ballot access? If we take that as a characteristic of a valid election, do you have any ideas about that?
I believe that a ballot with 9 or fewer candidates for a single office is not confusing, not crowded.
Did you say 9 or fewer?
Nine or fewer. And I have done extensive research. I have come up with a law, science law. If a state requires as many as 5,000 signatures, it will never have a crowded ballot. In other words, all the instances where there were more than 9 people on a ballot for a single office in all statewide general elections, all back to the 19th century, and all presidential primaries, the states that had to suffer more than 9 candidates always required fewer than 5,000 signatures. So it's quite simple. If you want to hold it down to 9 or fewer, just require 5,000.
Okay. This is opening it up. I'm sorry, Larry. But do you have any other characteristics or criteria that you would hold an election to?
I'm not, could you elaborate?
Well, I mean, okay, if there's an obstacle that you're confronting, usually you can turn it around into some principle that's being violated, and then it would be a question of how do you measure that, whether it's being met.
I think if we just relaxed, we'd be okay. I used the Federal Election Commission definition of National Political Party Committee,
Okay.
and I applied it backwards into U.S. history. That's a very easy definition. It's if it was on the ballot for president in at least 2 states, and it had candidates for Congress on the ballot in at least 2 states, the FEC says you're a national committee of a national political party. So I took that definition. Oh, and you have to have a bank account and a national chairman. If you run that definition back through time, we never had more than 11 parties in existence in this country, and the average has been 7. And in 2004, we had 8. In other words, people naturally have their own reasons for forming political parties, and they're based on really strong, deep-seated feelings. You know, people do not start a party willy-nilly. You read the contrary all the time, but if you look at this very little definition, two-state activity, it's a very small number of parties. So if we just relax and let the real political parties on the ballot, we probably wouldn't have a problem. Is that responsive?
Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you, thank you. Now let's move to Ms. Landis.
Hello, my name is Lynn Landis. I'm a freelance journalist. I've been writing about voting integrity and security since the year 2000. My background is I graduated from Temple University with a degree in political science in 1976. I was a poll worker. I've been a poll watcher. I was a Democratic committee person and party chair of my township in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I ran for local office. Last July, I filed 2 federal lawsuits, one against the use of any and all voting machines, and the other against the use of absentee voting, and that would include early voting. What I find the big problem we're facing here is that most Americans aren't familiar with what it is to really vote. We don't understand the fundamental concepts of voting. And I would say the most important thing is transparency in the process. You have to be able to see what's going on. Voting machines and voting by absentee ballot or early voting is a non-transparent process. So voting that way and transparency, those 2 things are mutually exclusive. We can't have one and the other at the same time. Some people have suggested, it's well known, and many computer scientists have testified, Dr. Avi Rubin, Dr. Rebecca Mercury for many years, dating back to 1989, Dr. David Dill, Dr. Roy Saltman. He wrote a report back in the 80s about all the problems to do with these machines and definite incidents to do with these machines. So there are reports dating back decades about the problems and lack of security to do with not only computerized voting machines, but any kind of voting machine. And just keep in mind, we've had these voting machines since the 1890s. We started absentee voting in the 1870s. So we have really been conducting clandestine remote voting, insecure, non-legitimate voting for more than a century. And I think if we look around and see how our dysfunctional democracy compares to democracies, particularly in Western Europe, we'll see a definite difference in social services and the way the citizens take an active part in their government. Voting is supposed to be a public process. Every step is supposed to be transparent. And instead, what we have is a privatized system, a mechanized system, and there's no ability at all to make this system safe. So I think the biggest problem we have is one of attitude about what it is to really vote. So when we look at what are the solutions, because many of us already accept, and many American people, I think, already don't trust these voting systems. But they're not going to trust the voting system if the American government also owned and controlled it. So it doesn't matter really if it's a private corporation or a public agency that's doing this. So we have to get to solutions. And whenever the solution includes these very same machines, regardless of whether it produces a paper ballot or not, you are not getting transparency in the process. Let's take, for instance, the first solution that was promoted by Dr. Rebecca Mercury. And that was, she's been promoting the paper ballot printer solution for paperless touchscreen since 1989. And at first, in my mind, it sounded like the obvious solution until you really stop and think about it. When you go into that polling booth and you are forced to use a machine in order to mark and cast your ballot, let's just say to mark it. A lot of people, myself included, get very flummoxed by these machines. It's a literacy test as if it were, it's a computer literacy test, not just for the voter, but also for the election official. And we've already heard testimony that most of these election officials have handed over their systems, lock, stock, and barrel, to the technicians because they don't understand what's going on. So first you have to use a machine. So you're not producing direct evidence of your own intent. To tell voters, you use this machine and then it'll spit out a paper ballot and you're responsible for verifying that paper ballot. That paper ballot is direct evidence of the action of the machine. It's circumstantial evidence of what that voter intended. And we know that there's going to be a large percentage of people who are going to grab that paper, if they can, or not, push that button, and have that paper fall into a barrel. What we found in this last election is that election officials were simply withholding the machines, causing voter suppression. So this machine is a huge obstacle. If I'm a poll watcher or a federal observer, and I'm standing outside the poll and I watch someone who's used a touchscreen that's produced a paper ballot, let's just say that election system allows them to carry that ballot out and stick it into a box. Again, I don't know if that paper was their work, what they really intended, or what the machine intended. With absentee and early voting, the result is the same. You've got non-transparency. You're allowing elections officials to maintain control of those ballots for days, if not weeks on end. And that's what the American people need to do, is take control of the elections themselves. Voting isn't for elections officials, it's for the people on the ground at your local precinct. And it's not rocket science. Even if you had a long ballot, all that means is you have fewer voters per precinct and more counting officials. In Canada, which, yes, they have federal elections, but they also have regional and municipal elections, it's basically 250 to 500 per precinct, with 4 elections officials per polling station. So it's a simple formula. It's not rocket science. It is not difficult. And when you have 95% of democracies voting this way, you have to wonder why Americans aren't even familiar with this concept. When I first started talking about it 3 years ago, that I felt this is the way we should be doing things, as well as Victoria Collier and other people who've been involved, but really a handful of people. I was described as the person who was the radical. But I had to say to people, no, 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 it's America who has made voting a remote, clandestine, backroom process. I would like to say that with absentee voting, that is spreading. Great Britain has expanded its use of, they call it postal voting. Mexico has just broadened its absentee voting, so now millions of people who do not live in Mexico will be voting in their elections. What kind of control is there? In my lawsuits, there's case after case where the Supreme Court has recognized that the polling booth and the polling precinct provide protection from harassment and intimidation for the voter. It provides transparency for poll watchers. So these things are provided only when you show up. And I like to compare it to jury duty. You wouldn't want to go on trial for murder and have the jury at home eating bonbons in front of the TV and just, dial in their vote. We don't have members of Congress or state assemblies dialing in their votes. They have to show up in order to participate. And voting is the kind of sacred process of democracy where you absolutely need to show up in order to participate. Again, what we have in this movement of well-intentioned people is the ballot printer solution, which is no solution, particularly when the machines are withheld or malfunction. The open source solution, which is no solution, because that has nothing to do with what takes place on the ground, and particularly with these re-examinations of these voting machines. It's interesting because, as far as I know, they're only looking at prototypes. No one's looking at each and every machine, and even if they did, there's no way you can safeguard these. So we really have to embrace the simple solution and what makes common sense and what democracy is all about. That's a paper ballot, hand count, on election day, all within a 12-hour period. And for people who said, well, those elections officials are going to be mighty tired, you can bring in a second team just to do the counting. You can draft these people. You don't have to pay them. We don't pay jurors more than a stipend. It's not rocket science, and it's not expensive. It's the simple solution that I find through my emails and through going to conferences. It's gaining in support. It has popular public support. Thank you very much.
Please. Okay, are there questions?
I have a question for you.
Ms. Landis, one of the things that I do take advantage of is early voting because I travel for a living, and most of the time I'm out of town and sometimes out of the country, and that seems to be a much easier process for me as a voter to vote in, rather than the absentee type of ballot. And for some people who do travel, a single election day would not be sufficient. So there does need to be a process whereby people who are not able to be there on election day.
I disagree. To be honest, you couldn't be on a jury and travel as well. If you're going to participate in some processes, you must be there. Once we started making excuses, and we started it after the Civil War with soldiers, it opened up Pandora's box. It's interesting when we've talked about standards for voting, because there are two standards. Actually, the standards that have been discussed by the Elections Assistance Commission are standards for machines. But there are voting standards, and the voting standards are these, and they're under federal statute and case law. You've got two standards of voting rights. Those qualified to vote shall be allowed to vote, and that those votes are counted properly. In statute, there's the role of the federal observer, and they say the federal observer is allowed to enter the polling place to do two things: to observe that those qualified to vote are allowed to vote, and that their votes are counted properly. They cannot do that if you're not there. They cannot do that if there's a machine involved in the process. So it's also, if you're going to go get, let's say, a passport or a visa, you have to appear there. You have to be there in person. And I would say the best parallel is jury duty being a member of Congress, if you're not there, you don't get to vote. There was a court case last year in Tennessee, and the disabled, it was the disabled plaintiffs, and they couldn't access the courtroom in this city because it was on the second floor. And the Supreme Court ruled that that courthouse had to install some sort of access for the disabled because they had a right to be there. And convenience, whether it's cost or time or whatever it is, convenience does not trump your constitutional rights. And in mentioning the disabled, because there are two groups that are mentioned, or two issues that are mentioned, to act as wedge issues to get these voting machines in the door. One is the disabled access, and the other is instant runoff voting. The disabled, certainly, I don't think many people would argue with that they should have access to every polling place. But in terms of the voting machine will violate their rights just as they will an able-bodied person's rights. And there is the ballot template for sight-impaired voters where they can go into a voting booth with the assistance of audio cassette and vote privately and independently. But the two organizations that represent many of our sight-disabled voters are also receiving money from the voting machine companies. And they have not informed these voters that they have these options. Rhode Island is big into tactile ballot templates for the disabled. In terms of instant runoff voting, that is conducted using paper ballots in other countries. So there is never any reason not to do it the right way, the way that's transparent and accessible to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Mary Beth.
This is still not working. Yeah. I salute you, Ms. Landis, for your service as a poll worker and a poll watcher, which, as you know, poll worker is particularly long and tedious. And as you probably also know, you've expressed that it might be a thing to do to draft some of these workers to work the polls. As you probably know, that jurors often are apathetic when they come to jury duty, and there have been court cases that have been hung juries due to juror apathy. So how could you make sure that we get motivated people to do poll working if we were to go to a draft system to get counters and poll workers?
Well, we've drafted in the military, and they get motivated. I had to show up for jury duty, and the judge is pretty good at motivating us to have the right attitude. That is the idea that, well, how are you going to do all these things to make this system work? This is the only option we have that's transparent. It's as if we're trying to defend what is our right instead of defending these, what's the excuse for these machines, which are indefensible. And the other issue that is not coming up at the Carter hearings, and I have not brought up yet, but it's quite clear that these two corporations, ES&S and Diebold, are very Republican connected. Now, can you imagine if Jane Fonda and her brother had started two corporations that were counting 80% of the vote? The Republicans would be yelling and screaming. So where are the Democrats? Where's President Carter? Where's former President Clinton in this issue? Where are the Democrats? They enjoy seeing 80% of our vote, 80% of all votes. It doesn't matter if it's touchscreen or optical scan. 80% of all votes are being counted by those two companies with known strong ties to the Republican Party. So it's funny because in a way this is very political along those lines because it's very partisan. Partisans are counting the vote. But on the other hand, it's not political because the Democrats are letting them get away with it. So it's a very huge problem. And if you were to ask me what I think the solution is, beyond the paper ballots and the hand counts, a lot of people are going to have a lot of trouble going back to the polls under these circumstances. There is no integrity left to this process.
Okay, our time is up. Ms. Joanne Karasik.
It's been a problem here because I would like mine to follow his.
I believe he left. Will he be back? Okay, Mr.
Because
Cobbleby.
mine's based on his recount reports.
Okay, all right. That makes sense if that's a logical progression. Mr. Wager.
My name is David Wager. I am a local accountant here in Houston, and I've been somewhat active in politics for the past 5 years. And after the 2004 election, in noticing the problem with the counts, decided that I wanted to be involved in the process of the election systems here in Harris County, and have started working with several people. We've created a coalition called the Verifiable Vote Coalition. It's a nonpartisan union of citizens in Harris County concerned about the lack of accountability in the current voting system used in local, state, and federal elections here in Harris County. Harris County currently retains no permanent record, paper or otherwise, to verify the vote count. Harris County retains only computer-generated memory files for short periods of time, and the voters of Harris County cannot verify their votes at the polling place. The voters cannot be certain that their votes are accurately counted. Members of the Verifiable Vote Coalition are calling for a record, paper, or other secured method that is indelible, human-readable, and permanent to be produced for every ballot submitted in Harris County elections. The record should be retained and secured after the election to be used in combination with the electronic ballots in a post-count audit to ensure that the vote counts are accurately recorded. The Verifiable Vote Coalition is currently circulating a petition in the Harris County area calling for the permanent record. In a short time, with a small number of volunteers, we have been able to obtain over 2,000 signatures in Harris County. The call for the permanent record seems to be supported by a broad range of voters. The Verifiable Vote Coalition is following the now dormant Texas Election Protection Coalition, encouraging changes in Harris County voting system. The Texas Election Protection Coalition worked the 2004 Texas election. The coalition members were present at several hundred voting sites in Texas and recorded several thousand voting irregularities reported to them by the voters. The irregularities were compiled and presented to the Harris County Clerk Beverly Kaufman office early in 2005. It was estimated that in Harris County, 1 in 10 voters reported an irregularity at the precincts where coalition members were present. Reports from voters included names not being included on the voting rolls, long lines, improperly trained and insufficient numbers of poll workers, incorrect procedures for provisional ballots, outright harassment, and incorrect votes nearly being recorded on the voting machines. Last year, another coalition of concerned citizens presented a petition to the Texas Secretary of State, signed by an estimated 20,000 concerned Texas citizens. The petition called for paper trails at Texas elections. The Secretary of State would not meet with the coalition's leaders and called the coalition a special interest group with no real ties to Texas voters and ignored their pleas. The Verifiable Vote Coalition now stands as the voters' advocate in Harris County. Its primary focus over the next year will be to educate Harris County voters on the problems inherent in our current voting system and of ways to correct the problems. Our message will primarily focus on one issue, permanent records at the voting place. We will be working to educate other progressive organizations and our nonpartisan organization and increase our membership. As we grow, we hope to sponsor more education events and town meetings, distribute literature, and visit community groups and organizations in hope of increasing awareness of the problem in Harris County. What we've found is the biggest problem in Harris County is that there's very little knowledge that there's a problem at all. If you notice today, there's very little press. The Houston's only newspaper is not reporting on this issue at all. There were several bills that were before the Texas legislature in the session that ended in May, and the Houston newspaper reported none of the bills, none of the activity that went on with the bills. The bills had hearings with very small amounts of people. So there's really not a lot of knowledge here in Harris County that there is a problem with the voting systems. And our coalition is attempting to work to change that and help people understand that there are problems. And hoping that as we increase the knowledge base, people will move towards changing the system that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there questions?
I thought I'd throw at you a question. Could you characterize your interaction with local election staff or officials? Are they receptive? Are they just getting to know you, or are they not? Are they the opposite?
We have met with local officials. We have not been able to meet with Beverly Kaufman, who is our clerk. The officials that we met with were very friendly, wanted to talk to us, but basically told us that there is absolutely no problem with the machines that they're using, and the voting system is really solid gold.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking like in this sort of phenomenon that we find in Ohio and some other places where we're actually going in and county office and district office at a time, and people are interacting with the poll workers. You're not quite at that level here. Is that correct?
They have actually the Texas Election Protection Coalition was very active and was very active with the county office.
Okay.
And they did do on election day, they had hotline to call in, and to call the county. They had one person directly in the county that was responsible for answering their calls and dealing with their problems. And that person was fairly responsive, but there was just too much to do. So, with one small coalition and one phone number and one person in the county available to help, the problems are systemic. And they really don't want to address the systemic nature of the problems. They want to be there to be friendly and nice, but not really to deal with what we consider problems.
And my last little question, are you doing anything towards trying to build a quantitative measure of how things are happening? Or is anybody that you're working with doing that?
At this point in time, we have not been. We've really been focusing more on educating people with the problem and really trying to develop a base of volunteers so that we can do more things and be more active.
Are you aware, is your county planning to use the machines you have now to comply with the Help America Vote Act? And if not, if they're planning to purchase new machines, are you aware of where they are in this process right now?
I believe they're using the ESS machines here in Harris County, and okay. I'm not really 100% positive on that one. Okay.
Eve?
Do you have any thought as to how you might get the word out so that more people know? I mean, is it a media problem, or what is the reason, do you think, that more people are not aware of this? It's a very serious problem, obviously.
It's definitely a media problem. The media are completely unresponsive. And the only way that we're going to get people to understand it is if we're out on the streets producing some kind of literature that addresses the problem and lets people know that it exists. And I think our best point of attack will be at the next election, to try to have as many people at the polls as we can to be educating people on the problems.
I'd like to just add to that. ES&S is owned by the Omaha World Herald Company, which is owner of the Omaha World Herald. So the media owns owns the largest voting machine company. The media hires the exit polling organization that many of us believe is in cahoots. So the media is part of the problem. And it's basically not a free press. It's a commercial, privately owned press, and very conservative at that. So they're not going to be helping us out. It's freelancers, internet people, that sort of thing, that are spreading this word.
Okay.
We do also have a public a radio station that is fairly active in reporting news, and that is one of the methods that we use. However, its listenership is not that great, so we have to go outside of that source to really hit people.
Okay. Yes, Becky. Can you come to a microphone, please? Right back here at the table. Your name is?
My name is Max Beauregard. I'd like to support what he's saying by pointing out the need is imminent in 2 recent elections. There was a city council race last year that was separated by 30 votes, and a recent state representative race, Hubert Bowe's race, went into multiple recounts. The initial balloting there was about 41,000, and Hubert won by 16 votes. So the need is imminent in terms of it being an appointment.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Karasik, since you'd like to speak after David Cobb, let me propose that we take a shift of gears for a minute. We have guests with us now. Dr. Robert Pastor, are you here? Okay, and Kay Stimson. Okay, and John Williams. These are key people from the Carter Baker Commission who have come to join us for a few minutes, and Dr. Pastor would like to greet us and address us with a few words. And do you need a brief synopsis, encapsulation of some of what we've covered today? Seth Johnson is going to take a few minutes and kind of give a quick summary. I mean, a lot of things have come out from earlier today, and so Seth's going to try to do a quick summary for you. Thank you. We may take about 5 minutes or so to 7 minutes to encapsulate, and then how long would you like to? Okay, just a few minutes there. So we'll be open-ended there.
Well, it would be very difficult to summarize what we've gone over today. Bob Petrakis started our session today. He has a book out with a lot of evidence, which should be entered into your record. Okay. And I'm sure he'll provide you with that.
That's your evening reading for tonight, if you'd like to.
It's essentially, I think it's focused on Ohio in the last presidential election. Various pieces of evidence suggest that we should be looking at the conduct of elections in America. He covered a lot of different things, and I really am not prepared to go in because I don't think I could be sufficient to the detail that he went into. But in terms of voter suppression, stopping shorting the number of machines or in various districts and so forth, he gave us a very good picture of what was going on. Our first panel was largely composed of people who have done quantitative studies. Kathy Dopp of U.S. Count Votes presented their exit poll analysis and their responses to the Edison-Mitofsky response to them. And Richard Hayes Phillips has done county-by-county analyses of various anomalies in Ohio. And I think it's safe to say that their testimony was very, what's the word? Compelling.
And also some precinct by precinct.
Precinct by precinct. Mm-hmm. Judy Alter spoke about patterns at, is it New Mexico for Judy Alter? Is that correct? Okay. Patterns of anomalies in New Mexico. David Griscom gave us an analysis of what appeared to be a highly coordinated pattern of behaviors in one particular precinct. in, I think it was Arizona, you know, where people deliberately did only 11 of certain kinds of manipulations, okay? But a lot of different cases where they chose 11, well, I don't know, perhaps it's a prime number. It'll be hard to track. I don't know. But he found it very intriguing. We also had Cynthia Test. I'm sorry, but I don't know exactly where she was speaking from. Do you think you could speak?
Yeah, she spoke to some of the issues that they observed and experienced in San Antonio.
Right. And Bev Harris is a black box voting, and she's doing a comprehensive across-the-country analysis of the impact of electronic voting on the election process. She came out with some rather strong recommendations regarding the fact that when you look at exactly what the technology is, which is flexible as opposed to secure, it becomes a tool for manipulating elections more than really securing them or providing confidence to the people who participate in them. She recommended that we simply have to have a moratorium, at least until the principle of having a transparent election that we can have confidence in is back in place. That may be not a fair representation of your position, but I think it's somewhat close, right? Okay. Ted Selker, I'm sorry, I'm not Ted Selker, Richard Winger, had spoken to us about ballot access issues. The problem for third-party candidates to actually get on the ballot throughout the country. This is a perennial problem, and it is a characteristic of a valid election process that is not being sufficiently addressed. Okay. Lynn Landis spoke to the need to basically not use electronic voting because it mediates the process. It stands between your ability to know that what you marked is actually what is counted, and I'm sure that's not exactly how she phrased it, but that's my paraphrasing. I may have overlooked somebody. If that's the case, I apologize. But that's basically where we are at right now. Oh, I'm sorry, David Wager, who you just heard testify, is speaking about the Houston situation.
Dr. Pastor, would you like to come join us either up here or down at the table here, either place where you're comfortable with, please? Okay, thank you. Thank you, testifiers. Dr. Pastor, we welcome you very much to this meeting and appreciate the opportunity for you to be here. And we will be presenting a preliminary report of findings to the Commission tomorrow. And then further, we will be developing a report on the findings that we have made and some recommendations out of the findings that we've seen and made. And that will be communicated further with you. Also, the body of the submissions that have been submitted along with the testimony of the people who presented will also be made available to the Carter-Baker Commission. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. English, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Oswald, Ms. Robertson. Is this working properly? Or?
Are we on?
I think you all know who I've just introduced. I've left Ms. Kutznick as well. I appreciate the opportunity of meeting with all of you. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to spend the whole day, but when I learned of this hearing, I decided to come down earlier. I was coming down later this afternoon in order to have the opportunity to hear a bit about what you're doing and also to give you a sense as to what the Commission on Federal Election Reform is doing. In the short time I have been here, not only do I appreciate your quick summary, but I appreciated the statements of the two previous speakers. We all begin from the same point of departure, regardless of what you may think. We begin out of a deep concern about the state of our electoral process and a belief that election reforms are absolutely essential to have full confidence in our American system. I think that confidence has been shaken beginning in the year 2000, and it has not been fully restored. Let me just say a word about myself first and then tell you a little bit about what the Commission is trying to do. I have been working for 20 years on election monitoring and democratization, starting with the first election that I monitored in the spring of 1986 in Chihuahua, Mexico. I learned about electoral fraud firsthand from the country that had mastered most of its techniques. From that experience, I worked at the Carter Center with Jimmy Carter for 2 decades, developing a technique of election mediation and observation, which we took all over the world to 30 different countries, trying to help parties within those countries define the rules and the terms that would permit a genuine and free election in countries that had little or no experience with democracy or free elections. In 1992, I invited a group of Mexicans and actually Cubans as well to observe the US presidential election and had the chance to travel through 159 counties in Georgia, asking the questions that I had learned to pose in other countries around the world. And at the conclusion of those several days of observation, I have to admit my complete astonishment and embarrassment at what I had learned about the state of the American electoral process. Most people had to wait 8 more years to learn how decentralized and how dysfunctional our electoral process was. After the election of 2000, I worked with Jimmy Carter and President Ford in the Carter-Ford Commission to develop a report that recommended a series of important reforms that became the Help America Vote Act, by and large, that passed in 2002. I think that was a very significant step forward for America. It was actually the first law in American history on electoral administration. It took us more than 200 years to write that first law and to overcome a barrier that many people had felt was insurmountable, was that the federal government should have no role to play in electoral administration. I think it's clear it has a role. The definition of that role as compared to the role of the states is still very much open for debate and for discussion. After the election of 2004, I spoke with former President Carter and with leading Republicans in the Congress who recommended that both Carter and former Secretary of State James A. Baker III should co-chair a commission on federal election reform to evaluate the progress of HAVA and to recommend improvements. President Carter and myself both had opportunities in the past to have worked with Secretary Baker, and both felt very positive and very strongly about how much he could contribute. And so we felt privileged by his agreement to co-lead this commission. We assembled a commission of 21 people that roughly represent 1/3 people who have either served or been elected as Democrats, 1/3 people who have served or been elected as Republicans, and 1/3 people who are either independent or nonpartisan. That composition was deliberate. But the most important element was that everyone was beyond politics right now and was going to approach these issues in the way of trying to find the best system for America right now, a system that we could all be proud of. We had a series of two sets of hearings on April 18th in Washington at American University. The Center for Democracy and Election Management, of which I am director, has organized the Commission on Federal Election Reform, and we hosted the first hearing on April 18th, where we heard from many representatives addressing the full range of problems that you have discussed here today, as far as you've let me know, and in fact beyond that. We dealt first with the Help America Vote Act. Then we dealt with issues of access to voting as well as the integrity of the ballot. And then we dealt with a series of issues on voting technology and election administration. Since that time, I have personally met with a group of non-governmental organizations and concerned citizens groups in Washington, a group of about 15 organizations that was chaired by Common Cause, which has a major project on elections. Our commission members have also met with members of Congress and their staff and communicated with them. And of course, as you know, tomorrow we are having our second set of hearings where we intend to delve more deeply into both the problems and into proposals for solution. Again, we will deal with questions of voter registration, a set of issues which I think are quite fundamental to the irregularities that have been noted by the poll workers in the Election Protection Unit organization that was set up in 2004. They received over 200,000 phone calls of complaints. The largest single set of complaints, roughly 39%, were regarding registration lists. We'll deal with identification and also questions of voter participation. Why, in fact, does the United States have such a relatively low level of voter participation as compared to other industrialized countries? We will deal with the voting technology issues that you've just heard a bit about as well. We have seen the movement towards nearly 1/3 of our voting machines being electronic, which itself pose new challenges for us to address, to make sure that these are auditable, that they can permit recounts, and that can be secure. We will deal also with election administration and the question of whether the model of election administration should be partisan, bipartisan, or nonpartisan. And then we will go into a private meeting where we will try to discuss in much greater depth these various issues and see whether this diverse group of 21 people can reach some consensus as to how to propose a better electoral system. So let me just say again how pleased I am to have the chance to speak with you, to tell you that I'm looking forward to hearing your report and the testimony that you've heard and other advice that you have for the Commission. We are very open to everything you have to offer. I view this particular hearing as a wonderful testimony to the American people's desire to find ways to improve their process for choosing their leaders. As I said before, in conclusion, I have studied elections all over the world. And in 2000, I organized the observation of just 2 elections, in Mexico and in the United States. And in Mexico, all of the election observers found the election free and fair. And in the United States, as you know, this was subject to real dispute. And there are two lessons that followed from that experience. First, Mexico was able to traverse from the most fraudulent system to a very professional system. And second, the United States, the longest democratic republic in the world with a constitution, had shown that complacence could be a danger. And there is only one remedy to that complacence, and that's active engagement by citizens. And so I congratulate you for holding this hearing, and I appreciate the chance to meet with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pastor. And one of the things that this body has convened to do is to take a look at the breaks in the election processes from a quality standpoint, the same type of quality principles that the Japanese applied to manufacturing that transformed the economics of the industrial world. These same principles apply to our information processes like voter registration, the voting process itself, the vote counting, the vote recounting. And so the kinds of quality principles that we've applied to manufacturing, we must apply for us to truly have sustainable election reform. And in our long-term report, this will be one of the things that we will focus on. What are some of the real root causes, and what are some of the types of improvements that will overcome those root causes and prevent the kinds of breaks and the alienation of and the disenfranchisement of the American citizens who want to vote but are not permitted to, or they do vote but their votes are not counted as they intended for them to be counted.
I'd like to add one note to that. I found it interesting that you, I may be reading more into what you said than what you did say, but you seem to position yourself as a person who espouses or entertains the centralization side of a centralization versus decentralized question. And the interesting thing about process improvement or quality improvement methods is that they establish a factual basis which allows you to empower at a local level. Okay, it doesn't presuppose a federal or a state level solution. That's why it's so highly appropriate for election processes. Also, the fact that it's fact-based, and I would submit that the factual bases that people are uncovering are certainly not being treated the way they ought to be treated in a truly free society with a real media, that would actually cover intriguing pieces of information. Okay, and I think that we have a lot of facts that need to be addressed. Okay, and I think that you should bear some careful consideration of how quality-focused methods and a factual-based method might help empower us to improve our election processes.
I think we're seeking to solve the same problem.
I think that's right.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you entertain questions from any of our audience? Any of the people here, John or Kate? Yes, Lynn.
Come to a mic.
Dr. Pastor.
Let me, in the meantime, while she's speaking, introduce two of my colleagues who are with me.
Yes, please, Doctor.
Ms. Kay Stimson, who's the Associate Director of the Commission on Federal Election Reform in charge of Media Liaison, and John Williams, who's a Policy Assistant for Secretary of State James Baker III. In addition, there's some materials we've left outside on what the Commission is working on and our schedule as well.
Okay.
Yes.
And for the record, Dr. Pastor, you're the Executive Director of the
That's
Carter
correct.
Baker Commission. Thank you.
At the first hearing, Dr. David Dill did testify about the fairly complete lack of security of the electronic voting machines. But I noticed that you had no one address the issue of the 3 corporations, or actually 2 corporations, that are counting 80% of the vote And as I testified earlier, these corporations have strong ties to the Republican Party. So you do have the testimony of the fact that we really can't secure the electronic voting system. That's the touchscreens and the optical scans or the ballot scanners. But you haven't entertained any testimony about the corporations, the Republican-controlled corporations, and the foreign-owned corporations that are counting America's votes. Why not?
We had, there are of course many issues, sub-issues that we may not have had people testify, but we've had a lot of the literature in which we've looked at it. Election Line has produced what I found one of the best single articles on the question of who the manufacturers are of the vending machines and what their contributions have been to different parties. That material is available to the Commission. It's part of the briefing material that they've had, so we're aware of it. There is the issue itself, of course, was raised by the CEO of Diebold during the last election when he made this comment as a co-chair of the Bush campaign that he wanted to deliver all the votes in Ohio to George Bush. So he raised the issue for himself, and I don't think there's any avoiding it right now. Indeed, he's found it difficult to avoid. But the exact way you deal with it in our system is not self-evident. All I can tell you is that we are aware of the issue that you've raised, and it is one of those that we've had some background papers on. And incidentally, I think the idea that you had of also recruiting poll workers is one that I have written up at some great length. That's what Mexico does, and it proved to be extremely effective in Mexico. What they do is just like jury duty. They recruit a high percentage of the citizens from each precinct, sometimes as many as 10 or 15%. And they train all of them in poll working, but they only take a small percentage of that needed for election day. They take those people who are the most educated and who are among the most prestigious as well. And by doing that, they not only say that poll working is a legitimate, prestigious civic responsibility, but they also get some of the best people there. And even those people who are not selected to do it on election day know a lot more about how to do the elections and how to conduct it and also how to vote than Americans would know, because they're never taught that experience. So I think it's a very interesting case. Whether it would work in the United States is another question, but I think it's a very interesting idea.
Bev Harris from Black Box Voting.
Yeah, I've got 4 of your books, all the same book.
Well, what you don't have is the fact that we've successfully hacked the system now in 5 different ways. Twice the central tabulator in a real elections office, 3 times the optical scan system themselves, completely corrupting the paper trail. It took less than 5 minutes. And the nature of the hack indicates that the system was certified in direct violation of FEC standards, not a gray area. It directly violated the standards in at least 23 different counts. When are you going to examine the certification process and actually take an honest look at these systems? Because I have to say, nobody's ever asked me. You may have my book, but you've never asked, and it's certainly been public. When we can penetrate a system in 90 seconds that count, and this system, by the way, counted 35 million votes and is in 30 states and 800 jurisdictions, why haven't you asked any questions about this?
Well, I've read your book. I don't know if you've read mine. And I've read a lot of the material that you've developed. I think it's very important. We have asked those questions. We will be asking those questions as well tomorrow in the section on voting technology. We think they're very important.
Wouldn't
as well.
you ask the people who hacked the system, the 2 Finnish scientists? Why would you ask someone who was not there and has no idea how it was hacked? This seems like, I'm sorry, but we had to go to Europe to bring 2 scientists in, and you did not ask anybody who actually had the information. They don't even know what was done. Wouldn't it seem apparent, since we are the only group in the United States that has done this, and we've now done this 5 times, that you would at least ask how it was done?
I think you've raised a very, very important issue, and it's an issue that we are preoccupied with as well, and that has to do with the security of electronic machines. I don't personally need to know exactly how you hacked into it. I know that I have a computer. I don't need to know exactly how it works or how it breaks down. I like to call on people to help me fix it, and I'd like to know whether there is a problem of security on our electronic machines. I think we all realize on the Commission there is a problem of security on the electronic machines, and therefore the relevant question is not necessarily how you hack into it, but how do we deal with this problem of security in the long term. And we have consulted very widely, and any further thoughts that you have beyond what I had read, I'd welcome that as well. But because I didn't ask how you hacked in the machines doesn't mean that we're not interested in the issue. We are very interested in the issue.
And let me say this, that Ms. Harris has indicated she has a report that is currently being peer-reviewed that addresses some of these issues of the problem, and that is going to be available around July 4th. And so that is one of the things that I think the Commission will be very interested in, along with, I think, some of the other documentation that has been made on electronic voting. Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Hi there. My name is Linda Curtis. I'm with Independent Texans, which is a loose affiliation of voters in Texas who shop the ballot. And I am going to try to...
Who what the ballot?
Shop the ballot. We vote for the person, not the party. And following up on Bev Harris, I do intend to get on your case a little bit, nicely, I hope. You probably know that 35% of Americans in various polls are now coming up as unaffiliated voters. They do not identify with a political party, and if they ask, if someone asks, are you a Democrat, Republican, or independent, 35%, the new plurality says, I'm independent. However, we have been disenfranchised for a very, very long time. I'm working with groups all across the country. By and large, they are not political parties who are trying to, who are seeking recognition for independent voters and our rights. I've been, for the last 25 years, in court, in the legislature, and on the ground as a political organizer trying to fight these unfair ballot access laws and other restrictions on independent voters. For example, here in Texas, Dr. Pastor, a voter is not allowed to sign a petition for a candidate in either the major parties or for independents or third parties if they vote in the primary. We have to get 45 to 60 or 70,000 signatures in somewhere between 59 and 75 days to get on the ballot, and we have to do that with people who did not vote in the primary, and consequently, very few make it. And you have to have a lot of money to go out and hire professionals to come in from all over the country to get on the ballot. So my question to you is given that people have, I've got gray hair here, I've worked for many years trying to do this, and I'm committed to doing it the rest of my life if I have to, but doggone it, couldn't you make it a little bit easier by raising this issue at the Commission? You didn't even mention us. What happened to those 72 million Americans? When are you going to give us a break?
We are, I met with a group representing independent candidates in Washington, and we are addressing these issues within the group. I think that there is within the Commission as well, that is to say in some of the background papers and some of our private discussions. I think there are several different models for exploring these issues. You know, for the longest period of time, America permitted the administration of our elections to be done by members in the government, even if those members of the government were partisan. 34 of the states in the United States, the senior election authority is the Secretary of State, who's run for office. We've moved in certain institutions like the Election Assistance Commission and the Federal Election Commission to a bipartisan means of organization. But we found in the Federal Election Commission, for example, that the two parties very often will either stalemate or they will collude against a third party or other public interests. And so the question really for America is whether we should move towards a different model that looks towards a nonpartisan basis. I think that is an issue that will be discussed by the Commission. Let me say that we're at a very early stage in our own thinking. There are 21 very independent, intelligent, experienced individuals who are going to struggle with these questions and to try to come up with answers that reflect their view of what is best for the United States. I can't tell you right now what that answer will be. All I can tell you is that that issue will be addressed. Yes, the Commission is meeting at this hearing in Houston, and then we'll be breaking into groups that will try to develop parts of the report, which will then be discussed in Atlanta in late August, and we'll try to iron out those parts of the report and reach some consensus, and then to present a report in Washington on September 19th. So these issues have been addressed. Whether they will be in the final report and in what form, I can't tell you that.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, I would like to defer to one of the other panelists, Mr. Tom Oswald, who is a mediator by trade, and he has some observations for us.
First off, Dr. Pastor, thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. It takes some considerable courage to come here and confront these people present here with strong feelings about these matters, and you're fielding the questions admirably, and I thank you for taking their input. It's obvious there's a lot of highly charged opinions here. I would just like us to try to keep in mind our goal today, and that is to try to provide this person and the rest of the Carter-Baker Committee with some tangible input that they can use in a most constructive manner to help them in their deliberations that hopefully will come to a point where there'll be some policy decisions made that can make a meaningful improvement. So let's just try to continue to do this in a most positive, professional, and academic manner. Okay? Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, I only have about 5 to 10 minutes if I could. Okay.
Yes, okay, we will honor that.
And maybe if it would be all right, Mr. Chair, that I could hear maybe 3 questions at once and respond to all 3. Would that be?
Okay, I think that would be fine. Quickly pose your question and let Dr. Pastor then address.
My name is Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips. We have had numerous expert and knowledgeable witnesses testify here today. For my part, in a sentence, I have investigated the Ohio election results precinct by precinct and have found 3 categories of problems: voter suppression, ballots cast but not counted, and alteration of the vote count sufficient to reverse the outcome of the presidential election. My question is this: are you going to allow us to testify under oath, under penalty of perjury, subject to questioning by the full Carter-Baker Commission, and if not, why not?
Hi, I want to first of all thank you very much for attending our hearing and for doing all the work that you've dedicated your life to on the last few years. My name is Kathy Dopp. I'm with groups of I've been working with groups of PhD computer scientists and mathematicians and statisticians to give you my card and to also give you a list of some of the mathematicians that I've been working with, very prestigious mathematicians, and present you with some recommendations for what states and counties can do in terms of releasing data so that we can monitor and analyze their election results in order to detect errors in vote counts. There's just a little 2-page thing there. And then also, we've done a little analysis on how vote counts can be routinely audited, have the paper trail audited in just a small percentage of the precincts immediately when polls close. And this can be very effective, up to 90% or much higher in actually finding vote miscounts and correcting election results.
We only have 2 minutes left.
Sorry, and all the documents we submitted here, and one you can take with you on the exit poll analysis written by quite a few statisticians, and this was written by mathematicians, PhD from BYU, University of Utah, Stanford, and good recommendations. And again, thank you very much for coming. You'll use some of our recommendations.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Bill Crozier. First, I want to thank you, Dr. Pastor, for your work with the Carter Center as well as the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Integrity or Reform. We've heard today various testimony, which I think was quite disturbing, about various kinds of problems throughout the country, different kinds of problems in different areas. I'm also with a non-partisan group called the Verifiable Voting Coalition. One of the things that we found is that regardless of party affiliation, people want paper ballots. They want something they can verify. The elected officials are afraid to talk about this for some reason.
You have 60 seconds left.
But I hope that your commission can look into this and realize that the people, I think, will support reform, which will involve paper verifiable paper ballots or voter verifiable paper trails. It's very important to people. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ed Spencer, and I'm concerned about electronic voting. We all know that software technology and hardware technology is expanding rapidly, and in a sense, electronic voting is like electronic warfare. There is no equilibrium point. And as technology becomes more complex, then the number of attack vectors for an electronic system increases, including people from outside the country taking over or making a major change. And I'm wondering if this way of thinking about things is happening with the commission, and also if you use electronic voting, will you make certain that the number of attack vectors is listed publicly for its systems?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pastor, for taking the time to be here to hear us. I'm Bill Moss. My wife and I've served 18 years on the Columbus Board of Education, Columbus, Ohio. I've been elected 5 times. I'm currently running for the Board of Education there. My wife and I are the lead plaintiffs in Moss versus Bush regarding the mischief that took place around the election 2004 in Ohio. I don't know what you've been presented with regards to evidence of criminal wrongdoing, but as a result of these hearings here today, you will be presented with evidence of criminal wrongdoing in that election on the part of the Bush-Cheney campaign. My question is, what will you and the commission do about the evidence indicative of the crime and its scale for the election 2004? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First, with regard to the question by Richard Phillips and Reverend Moss, I think there may be some confusion as to what the Carter-Baker Commission is and intends to do, and these questions are helpful in clarifying. We're not a public commission, that we do not subpoena documents or data or testimony for that matter. We are a private commission that's funded by foundations, by the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Knight Foundation, Omadir. And the purpose is not to look at what has happened in Ohio or what has happened even in the election of 2000. Purpose is to have a greater understanding of the outstanding problems with the idea that we would offer our recommendations on how to improve them. So the case, Reverend Moss, that you are bringing in court is appropriately to be decided in court rather than by our commission. And Mr. Phillips' testimony, while I think would be very useful here, for the purpose of our commission, we really do want to focus more on generic issues and look towards ways to solve that. I think with regard to Kathy Dopp, I am very familiar with your writing. In fact, I've got this and other things as well. I do believe that the system has been much too closed. Mr. Johnson was saying a little while ago that America could learn from the world, much as our businesses have learned. I think Mr. Oswald perhaps as well. I think we haven't learned because we've been closed. And we've therefore betrayed a critical element of America. I brought around a group of international observers in this last election in 2004, and I sought unrestricted access to polling booths in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. And I received responses from the senior election officials saying, maybe we'll let you visit 2 designated polling sites. I said, no, you don't understand. That's not the way election observation occurs. Last week, the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, was in Cairo and said that a critical element of any democracy is to permit election observers and monitors unrestricted access to all of the polling sites. Well, we don't have that in the United States right now. There is, in fact, only one state in the United States, Missouri, that permits that. And we need to open ourselves up. And as we do, I think we'll be more innovative. Just as everybody has learned, the best way to become competitive is to be open and compete. So I think there is data that is required, that should be given not only to the public, but to scholars and archivists and researchers to understand much better about how our electoral system works, because only by understanding that are we going to be in a better position to improve that. With regard to Mr. Crozier's question and also Mr. Spencer's, as I said at the beginning, we have seen a movement towards more electronic voting in the last few years. I suspect we'll see even more. These raise real serious challenges, and it's clear that many people here are aware of those challenges, and that's why they're making their voices known. We intend to address that in our commission. As I said before, I can't tell you what our answer will be. I can tell you, however, that these issues will be discussed and will be confronted by the commission, and the report will be available in mid-September. Thank you very much for this chance.
Thank you, Dr. Pastor, very much for your being. We'll take a 15-minute recess.